The rain fell in sheets, blurring the city lights into a watercolor mess of neon and shadow. Inside the sterile brightness of a McDonald's, Alexander Sterling felt a million miles away from the boardroom where he'd just negotiated a 9-figure merger. He was just a dad, trying to wrangle 2 tired children whose patience had dissolved with the setting sun. 6-year-old Mia was meticulously deconstructing her cheeseburger, while 8-year-old Leo stared into the middle distance, lost in a world only he could access. Alexander's own filet-o-fish sat untouched. He hated them, but Mia loved the little red boxes, and after a week of tense meetings, he would have bought her a dozen if it meant seeing her smile. "Daddy, can I have another fry?" Mia asked, her voice small. "Of course, sweetie." He scanned the bustling counter, his eyes tiredly sweeping over the uniformed employees. And then he saw her. Time didn't stop, fractured. It was as if the last 15 years compressed into a single, sharp intake of breath. She was older, of course. The carefree light in her eyes had been replaced by a quiet exhaustion that he recognized in himself. Her hair, once a wild mane of chestnut curls, was pulled back in a severe, functional bun. But it was her, Alara Vance, the girl who had owned his high school heart, the one who smelled of library books and cinnamon, the one who had written poetry in the margins of his calculus textbook. Now she was wiping down a sticky tabletop, her movements economical and weary. A name tag on her crisp uniform read Alara. Felt like a punch to the gut. What was she doing here? What cosmic cruelty had placed the brilliant, ambitious girl who was going to change the world behind the counter of a fast food restaurant on a rainy Tuesday night? He remembered their last conversation, a tearful, whispered argument under the bleachers after graduation. He was heading to Yale, to the future his father had meticulously blueprinted for him. She was staying, caring for her sick mother, her scholarship to a state university a painful, useless piece of paper. "I'll wait," he'd promised, his voice cracking with the hollow certainty of youth. "We'll figure it out." They never did. Life, in its relentless way, had pulled them apart until the thread connecting them snapped. He'd sent letters, then emails. They went unanswered. Eventually, the silence became its own answer. He'd married a wonderful woman, Isabel, built an empire, had 2 beautiful children, and then lost her to an illness that no amount of money could cure. His life was a gilded cage of grief and responsibility. And Alara was here. "Daddy." Leo's voice broke through the fog of memory. "You're staring." Alexander blinked, forcing his gaze away from her. "Sorry, buddy." Just thinking, he fumbled in his pocket, his fingers brushing against the cool metal of his black card. The irony was staggering. He could buy this entire franchise, this entire block, without a second thought. But he couldn't erase the 15 years of hardship etched onto her face. He watched as she offered a tired but genuine smile to a family, handing a little boy a balloon. The gesture was so quintessentially her, a small, quiet act of kindness in a world that had clearly not been kind back. The question wasn't what had happened to her. The question, the one that echoed in the sudden, cavernous space in his chest, was what was he going to do about it now? He had to know she was okay. Not just okay, but safe. The impulse to stride over there, to throw money at the problem, was overwhelming. It was the only way he knew how to fix things anymore. But he saw the fierce pride that still lived in the set of her jaw, the same pride that had refused to let him pay for her prom dress all those years ago. A grand gesture would only humiliate her. He needed a different approach. He watched his children, their innocent faces illuminated by the harsh overhead lights. They were his heart, the reason he kept moving forward. And in that moment, an idea began to form, a quiet, desperate plan that felt both insane and absolutely necessary. He needed to get closer, to understand. He needed a reason to be in her orbit again, not as Alexander Sterling, CEO of Sterling Enterprises, but as Alex, the tired dad with 2 kids who just needed a little help. His first step was to create a connection, a bridge across the chasm of years and circumstance. The next day, he dressed down in an old gray hoodie and jeans, the kind of clothes he wore when he was just a father, not a tycoon. He drove his most nondescript car, a practical SUV, back to the same McDonald's, his heart pounding with a nervous energy he hadn't felt since he was a teenager. He brought Leo and Mia with him, his small, unknowing accomplices. As they walked in, he saw her. She was working the register this time, her voice low and patient as she took an elderly man's complicated order. "Remember the plan, guys?" he whispered to his children. "Mia, you know what to do." Mia nodded, her expression serious. They ordered, and as Alara handed him the tray, their eyes met for a fleeting second. There was no flicker of recognition. To her, he was just another customer, another face in the endless stream. The thought should have been a relief, but instead, it stung. He led the kids to a booth. As planned, Mia, with the theatrical flair only a 6-year-old possesses, accidentally knocked her entire cup of orange soda onto the floor. The sticky liquid spread in a bright, accusatory puddle. "Oh no!" Mia cried, her bottom lip trembling on cue. Before Alexander could even react, Alara was there with a mop and a roll of paper towels. She didn't sigh. She didn't show a hint of annoyance. She knelt, her focus entirely on the upset child. "Hey, it's okay," she said, her voice soft and soothing. "Accidents happen. That's why we have lots and lots of napkins." She looked at Mia, a gentle smile touching her lips. "What's your name?" "Mia," she mumbled, still in character. "Well, Mia, that was a very loud spill. I bet the floor was thirsty," she winked, and Mia let out a small giggle. The simple, effortless way she diffused the situation, the genuine warmth she showed his daughter, sent a pang through Alexander's chest. This was the Alara he remembered. He watched, silent, as she cleaned up the mess, her movements efficient and graceful. When she was done, she returned with a fresh cup of orange soda. "Here you go. This one's on the house." "Thank you," Alexander said, his voice thicker than he intended. "No problem," she replied, her gaze briefly meeting his before she turned back to the counter. It was now or never. He gathered their things, and as they walked out, he purposefully left his wallet on the table. It was a simple, classic test. A wallet full of cash and credit cards, left in a place where the employees likely struggled to make ends meet. He waited in the car, his stomach in knots. He wasn't testing her morals, not really. He was testing his own memory. He was hoping to see the person he knew was still in there. 5 minutes later, the door to the restaurant opened. Alara hurried out into the drizzle, holding his wallet, her brow furrowed in concern. She spotted his SUV and ran over, tapping on the window. He rolled it down. "Yes, sir, you left this," she said, slightly out of breath, holding out the worn leather wallet. "I was worried you'd be long gone." "Oh, wow," he said, feigning surprise. Thank you so much. I didn't even realize." He took it from her, their fingers brushing for a microsecond. A jolt, faint but unmistakable, passed between them. "You saved me a massive headache. Please, let me give you something for your trouble." He started to pull out a $50 bill. Her hand went up, stopping him. "No, absolutely not. I just did what anyone would do." Her eyes were clear and direct, and in them, he saw the unshakable integrity he remembered so well. "Are you sure?" he pressed gently. "I'm sure," she said, a firm set to her mouth. She was already turning to go back inside. "Wait," he said, the word coming out louder than he'd planned. "My name is Alex. These are my kids, Leo and Mia." She glanced into the back seat, and her expression softened as she saw the children. "The thing is," he began, improvising wildly, I'm in a bit of a bind. I'm a single dad, and my nanny just quit without notice. I work long hours and I'm desperate. I saw how you were with my daughter. The way you handled that spill. You were so kind. I know this is a crazy, out-of-the-blue question, but would you ever consider a job as a nanny?" He held his breath. Alara stared at him, bewildered. "You want to hire me? You don't know anything about me." "I know you're honest," he said, holding up the wallet. "And I know you're good with kids. I'd pay you double what you make here. Triple, even. We can do background checks, references, whatever you need. I'm just really stuck. He tried to look as harried and desperate as he felt, which wasn't difficult. She looked from his face to his children and back again. He could see the conflict in her eyes, the suspicion, the exhaustion, but also a tiny flicker of hope. I don't know, she stammered. I have to think about it. Of course, he said quickly, scribbling his personal cell number on the back of a napkin. Just, please think about it. He handed it to her. Thank you again. For everything. He drove away, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs, leaving her standing in the rain, staring at a soggy napkin that held the power to change both of their lives. She called 2 days later. Her voice was hesitant, but she agreed to an interview. Alexander arranged for it to be at a neutral coffee shop, still maintaining his Alex, the struggling single dad persona. He wanted her to say yes for the right reasons, not because of the sterling name. He learned more about her life in that hour than he had in the last 15 years. Her mother had passed away 5 years ago after a long, expensive battle with cancer, leaving Alara with a mountain of medical debt. She'd been working 2, sometimes 3 low-wage jobs ever since, just to keep her head above water. The scholarship, the dreams of being a writer, had all been casualties of a life spent just trying to survive. There was no bitterness in her voice, only a profound, bone-deep weariness. I'm just trying to keep the lights on, she said with a shrug, a phrase that was so simple yet so devastating. He told her a version of his own story, carefully edited. He was a consultant who worked from home a lot. His wife had passed away a couple of years ago, and he was overwhelmed. Every word was true, just stripped of its scale. By the end of the conversation, he knew with absolute certainty that he was doing the right thing. He offered her the job, with a salary that would be life-changing for her but was a rounding error for him. He saw the tears well in her eyes as she accepted, and he had to fight the urge to tell her everything. But not yet. First, he had to earn back her trust, not as a millionaire, but as a man. Alara's first day at the Sterling mansion was a study in quiet shock. Alexander had tried to prepare her, telling her the house was a bit large, which was like calling the Grand Canyon a bit deep when his driver, disguised for the day as a friend helping him out, pulled through the wrought iron gates and up the long, winding driveway to the imposing stone facade. Alara's face went pale. "This is your house?" she whispered, her eyes wide as she took in the manicured lawns and fountains. "It was my wife's family home," he explained, a convenient half-truth. "It's too big, I know. A little ridiculous." He gave her a tour, his own discomfort growing as he saw the opulent, sterile rooms through her eyes. The grand foyer with its marble floors and sweeping staircase, the formal living room that was never used, the dining room that could seat 30. It wasn't a home, it was a museum to a life he was supposed to be living. When they reached the kitchen, a cavernous space of stainless steel and cold granite, Alara ran a hand over the counter. "It's beautiful," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "But does anyone ever cook in here?" The question hung in the air. The truth was no one did. A private chef prepared meals on weekdays, and on weekends they mostly ordered in. The kitchen, like the rest of the house, was a perfectly designed, soulless space. It had been years since the scent of anything other than disinfectant had filled the air. Isabel hadn't been much of a cook, and after she was gone, the silence in the house had become deafening. Alara started work, and within a week, the house began to change. It started subtly. A vase of wildflowers, likely picked from the edge of the property, appeared on the kitchen island. The children's chaotic artwork, previously confined to their playroom, began to appear on the giant, empty refrigerator door. Then came the smells. One afternoon, Alexander came home early and was met not with the usual oppressive silence, but with the warm, buttery scent of baking cookies. He followed it to the kitchen to find Alara, Leo, and Mia, all dusted with flour, laughing as they cut out shapes from a sheet of dough. For the first time in 2 years, his house sounded like a home. He learned more about her past in small, quiet moments. She carried a worn, leather-bound journal with her everywhere. One evening, after the kids were in bed, He found her sitting in the kitchen, carefully transcribing notes into it. "What's that?" he asked gently. She showed him. It was a recipe book, filled with her mother's elegant handwriting. "She was always cooking, always baking," Alara said, her voice soft with memory. "It was how she showed her love. When she got sick, she couldn't hold a pen anymore, so she'd tell me the recipes, and I'd write them down. It's all I have left of her, really." Her words, he saw the grief, still raw and close to the surface, and understood that her struggle wasn't just financial. It was the deep, aching loneliness of losing the person who was her entire world. He, in turn, began to open up about Isabel. He found himself talking about her, not just as a sainted memory for the children, but as a real person. He told Alara about Isabel's wicked sense of humor, her love for modern art, her frustration with the gilded cage of her family's wealth. "She would have hated how quiet this house became," he admitted one night, standing by the vast windows overlooking the city. "She filled it with life." "Maybe it's time to let some life back in," Alara said softly. And she did. She organized pillow forts in the formal living room, much to the horror of the weekly cleaning service. She taught Leo how to bake his favorite lemon drizzle cake from her mother's book. She discovered Mia's hidden talent for painting and set up an easel for her in the sunroom. She wasn't just a nanny. She was the heart the house had been missing. Alexander found himself coming home earlier and earlier, drawn by the warmth she had created. He would linger in the kitchen after dinner, talking with her as she cleaned up, their conversations easy and comfortable. The ghost of the boy he had been and the woman she had become found common ground in their shared wounds and their deep, abiding love for his children. One rainy Saturday, the power went out. The house, stripped of its electronic hum, was plunged into a startling silence and shadow. The emergency generators kicked in, providing a dim, ambient light, but the kids were spooked. Alara, unfazed, dug out a box of candles and a deck of cards. Soon, the three of them were sitting on the floor of the living room, their faces illuminated by flickering candlelight, playing a boisterous game of Go Fish. Alexander sat on the couch, watching them, a feeling of profound peace settling over him. He saw Alara throw her head back and laugh, a genuine, unburdened sound, and it was like seeing the sun after a long winter. In that moment, he wasn't her employer. He wasn't the boy from her past. He was just a man falling in love with the woman who was healing his family. He knew with a terrifying certainty that he couldn't imagine his life or his children's lives without her in it. The charade of being Alex, the consultant, was becoming harder to maintain, because the truth of his feelings was becoming impossible to hide. The bubble of their found family was always destined to burst. The outside world, with its harsh judgments and cruel optics, could only be held at bay for so long. The catalyst was something small, something innocent. A trip to the zoo. It was a beautiful, sunny afternoon, and the four of them were a picture of domestic bliss. Alexander had forgotten, for a few precious hours, that he was Alexander Sterling. He was just Alex, a dad buying ice cream for his kids and the woman he was falling for. He'd even made Alara laugh, a real, deep laugh, by attempting a terrible impression of a penguin. A freelance photographer, hunting for B-list celebrities, caught the moment. He didn't recognize Alexander at first, but the shot was good. A happy, attractive family. It was only later, when the photo was run through an agency database, that the bombshell dropped. The headline was explosive: Billionaire widower Alexander Sterling's secret new love, the nanny. The article was a masterpiece of insinuation and classist snobbery. It painted Alara as a cunning gold digger, a fast food worker who had cleverly maneuvered her way into the Sterling fortune. They dug up her past, her mother's debt, her cramped apartment, twisting her story of resilience into a narrative of desperation and opportunism. The photo of them laughing at the zoo was captioned, "$1 million smile." The fallout was immediate and brutal. The board of Sterling Enterprises convened an emergency meeting. Arthur Davenport, a stern, old-money board member who had been a friend of Isabel's father, cornered Alexander in his office. "Alex, you have to get a handle on this. he said, his voice laced with icy disapproval. This is a brand management nightmare. The Sterling name is synonymous with prestige with a certain caliber. A relationship with your domestic staff. It's unseemly. It makes you look weak, foolish. She's not just domestic staff, Arthur. Alexander shot back, his hands clenched into fists. She's a wonderful person. I'm sure she is, Davenport said dismissively. But optics are reality. We have the annual Sterling Foundation Gala in 2 weeks. Our biggest fundraising event of the year. Donors are getting skittish. They want to see stability, not a tabloid scandal. You need to end this cleanly and quietly. For the good of the company. For the good of your children. The pressure mounted from all sides. His phone buzzed incessantly with calls from his PR team, his lawyers, even concerned wealthy friends. The narrative was always the same. She wasn't one of them. She was a liability. The poison of their words began to seep into his resolve. He looked at the chaos. The media vans camped outside his gates. The whispers and stares. Was he being selfish, dragging Alara into this carnivorous world? Was he exposing his children to ridicule? The doubt, cold and sharp, found a home in his heart. He had to talk to her. He found her in the kitchen, wiping down the counters, her back to him. The newspaper, with their picture on the front, was lying on the table. She didn't have to say a word. He could feel the tension radiating from her, the quiet way she held her shoulders, as if bracing for a blow. Alara, he began, his voice sounding hollow in his own ears. She turned, her face pale but her expression composed. They make it sound so sordid, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Like I'm some kind of villain. You're not, he said immediately. None of this is true, isn't it? She asked, a flicker of pain in her eyes. I am the nanny. You are a billionaire. I needed a job and you gave me one. Those are the facts. They just twisted them. He wanted to pull her into his arms, to tell her that none of it mattered, that they would face it together. But Davenport's words echoed in his head. For the good of your children. He thought of Leo being teased at his private school, of Mia seeing her father and the woman she'd come to love splashed across magazines at the grocery store checkout. The fear was a cold knot in his stomach. He made a choice. The wrong choice. The coward's choice. I think it would be best if you took some time off, he said, the words tasting like ash. Just until this dies down. I'll pay you, of course. You can stay at a hotel, somewhere quiet. Alara's composure finally cracked. He saw the hurt, sharp and deep, flash across her face. You're firing me, she stated, her voice flat. No, I'm not. I'm trying to protect you. To protect us. The words were weak, and they both knew it. He was protecting his reputation, his company, his comfortable world. He was choosing the cage over the person who had shown him how to fly. Protect me? She said, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. By sending me away? By proving them right? That I'm just the temporary help who got too close. She untied her apron and folded it neatly on the counter. Her movements were precise, deliberate, final. I understand, Alexander. The use of his full name was a slap. You have a world to protect. I just wish, for a second, you'd thought I was worth being a part of it. She walked past him, her head held high, and he didn't have the courage to stop her. He just stood there in the silent, fragrant kitchen she had brought back to life, listening to the sound of her footsteps fading away, leaving him alone with the ghosts and the consequences of his fear. The 2 weeks that followed were a special kind of hell. The house reverted to its former state. Silent, sterile, and cold. The scent of cinnamon and baking bread was replaced by the smell of lemon polish. The children's laughter was gone, replaced by a sullen, confused quiet. Mia left her uneaten dinners, pushing the food around her plate. Leo retreated into his books, his face a mask of disappointment. Why did Alara have to go? Mia asked one night, her voice trembling. Was she mad at me?
No, eso es tie.
Of course not, Alexander said, the lie heavy on his tongue. It's complicated. You miss her, Leo stated, not as a question but as a fact. He looked at his father with an unnerving clarity. We all do. The house is sad again. He was right. The house was sad. Alexander was sad. He walked through the empty rooms, haunted by her absence. He saw her ghost everywhere, in the neatly folded throw blanket on the couch, in the wildflower that was now wilting in its vase, in the flower he found dusted on the floor near the pantry. He had made a colossal mistake. He had listened to the wrong voices. He had prioritized the sterile opinions of board members over the vibrant, beating heart of his own home. He had broken not just his own heart, but his children's too. And for what? For optics? For the Sterling brand? The realization settled on him with the weight of an anchor. The brand was worthless if the man behind it was a coward. The night of the Sterling Foundation Gala arrived. It was the glittering jewel in the city's philanthropic crown, a night of tuxedos, champagne, and performative charity. Alexander stood backstage, staring at his reflection in a dressing room mirror. He looked the part. A perfectly tailored Tom Ford suit, a stoic expression. He was the image of stability and control that Davenport and the board wanted. And he had never felt more like a fraud. He held the speech his PR team had written for him. It was full of polished platitudes about market growth, synergy, and corporate responsibility. It was meaningless. He thought of Alara, working 2 jobs to pay off her mother's medical bills. That was responsibility. He thought of her kindness to his children, her quiet dignity in the face of a world that had given her nothing but hardship. That was strength. He crumpled the speech in his hand. He walked onto the stage, the warm glow of the spotlights feeling like an interrogation lamp. Hundreds of the city's most powerful and influential people looked up at him expectantly. He saw Davenport in the front row, giving him a small, approving nod. Alexander took a deep breath and stepped up to the podium. "Good evening," he began, his voice steady. "I have a speech here. It's a very good speech. It talks about our foundation's commitment to building a better future." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "But I'm not going to read it, because I've come to realize that you can't talk about building a better future if you're not willing to be a better man in the present." A murmur went through the crowd. Davenport's smile faltered. "For the last few weeks," Alexander continued, his gaze sweeping the room, "I've been listening to a lot of advice about optics, about perception, about what is appropriate for a man in my position. And the advice I was given was to distance myself from someone who didn't fit the mold. Someone whose bank account wasn't large enough, whose background wasn't polished enough. Someone who works for a living, who has faced debt and loss with a grace and integrity that most of us in this room could never fathom." He didn't need to say her name. The story had been in all the papers. The murmurs grew louder. "I'm told it's about protecting a brand," he said, his voice ringing with a newfound conviction. "But a brand is just a story we tell. And I'm not interested in telling a story that says a person's worth is measured by their job title or their zip code. I'm interested in a story that values kindness, honesty, and resilience. And I failed that story. I listened to fear, and I hurt someone I care about deeply, someone my children love. I chose the empty approval of strangers over the happiness of my own family." He looked directly at Davenport, whose face was now a thunderous shade of red. "So tonight, I'm announcing a new direction for the Sterling Foundation. We're launching a new initiative, effective immediately. The Second Start program, it will provide grants to erase medical debt for families who have lost a primary caregiver. It will fund job training and educational scholarships for those who've had to put their dreams on hold to care for a loved one. We will honor the quiet, unseen heroes, the people who are just trying to keep the lights on." He let the echo of Alara's words hang in the silent ballroom. "Because those are the people who are truly building a better future. And they deserve our support, not our judgment." He set the crumpled speech on the podium. "Thank you." He walked off the stage, ignoring the stunned silence that was slowly breaking into a smattering of applause. He didn't care about their reaction. There was only one person's reaction he cared about. He had to find her. He had to make it right. He drove straight to her apartment building, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He didn't call first. This couldn't be a text or a phone call. It had to be face-to-face. He had the kids with him in the back seat. They had insisted on coming, their small faces set with a determined hope that mirrored his own. He parked and walked up the 3 flights of stairs to her door, his tuxedo feeling absurdly out of place in the modest, clean hallway. He knocked, the sound echoing loudly. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then he heard the click of the lock. The door opened a few inches. Alara stood there, dressed in worn sweatpants and an old t-shirt. Her eyes were red-rimmed, as if she'd been crying. They widened in shock when she saw him, and then softened when she saw Leo and Mia standing behind him. Before either adult could say a word, Mia pushed past her father and threw her arms around Alara's legs. "We missed you," she cried, her voice muffled against the soft fabric of Alara's pants. "Daddy was sad and the house was sad and we want you to come home." Leo stepped forward, more reserved but just as earnest, and held up a piece of paper. It was a drawing, a crayon portrait of the 4 of them, smiling under a giant, yellow sun. "I made this for you," he said quietly. Tears welled in Alara's eyes as she knelt, hugging Mia tightly and taking the drawing from Leo. She looked up at Alexander, her expression a mixture of confusion, hurt, and a fragile, burgeoning hope. "They're right," Alexander said, his voice thick with emotion. "I was sad. I was an idiot, a coward. There's no excuse for what I did. I listened to all the wrong people for all the wrong reasons. I let their fear and their prejudice dictate my actions, and I broke our family." He took a shaky breath. "My speech tonight, everything I said, it was for you. It was about you. I was wrong, Alara. So deeply, profoundly wrong." She stood up, still holding Mia's hand, her gaze searching his. "I saw it," she whispered. "A friend sent me a link. I saw what you said. Then you know," he said, his voice cracking, "you know that I don't care about the board or the optics or the money. Care about you. About this," he gestured to the kids, to the space between them. "This is what's real. You brought my family back to life, and then I pushed you away like a fool. I am so sorry." He stood there on her threshold, stripped of all his power and prestige, offering nothing but his raw, honest regret. The silence stretched, filled only by the sound of their breathing. He had no right to ask for her forgiveness, no right to expect her to walk back into the mess he had created. He could only stand there and wait. Finally, Alara looked down at the children, then back up at him. She stepped back, opening the door wider. "You should come in," she said softly. "It's cold out in the hall." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was an invitation. It was a start. And as he and his children stepped across her threshold, Alexander felt the first true glimmer of hope he had felt in weeks. He was finally home. In the days that followed, they didn't try to define what they were. They simply were. Alara agreed to come back, not as a nanny, but as something more, something essential. The pretense was gone. She was Alara and he was Alexander, and they were figuring it out one day at a time. The media frenzy, surprisingly, began to shift. Alexander's speech had gone viral. The story of the cold-hearted billionaire had been replaced by the story of a man who stood up for his values. Donations poured into the new Second Start program. The narrative had changed from scandal to romance, a modern fairy tale. But inside the stone walls of the mansion, it was quieter, simpler. It was about rebuilding trust. Their shared mission became the Sterling Foundation's new initiative. Alexander, true to his word, poured resources into it, but he insisted that Alara lead it. "This was inspired by you, by your mother," he said. "It should have your heart." They converted a recently closed community center in a struggling neighborhood into the program's headquarters. They named the centerpiece the Vance Kitchen, a state-of-the-art culinary training facility and soup kitchen that would use the recipes from her mother's beloved book. They spent their days there side by side. Alexander, the CEO who could command a boardroom, found a surprising joy in manual labor. He helped paint walls, haul equipment, and interview staff. Alara, who had spent years feeling powerless, blossomed as a leader. She designed the curriculum, planned the menus, and met with the first recipients of the medical debt grants, her empathy and quiet strength making her a natural advocate. They worked together, a seamless team. In the shared purpose of helping others, they found their own healing. They were not a billionaire and his former nanny. They were partners, building something meaningful together. The children were often there after school, helping to plant a small herb garden or taste-testing new cookie recipes. Their laughter the constant, joyful soundtrack to the project. The Vance kitchen became a place of warmth and second chances, not just for the community, but for the family at its heart. One evening, months later, the kitchen was finally ready for its grand opening the next day. The new stainless steel counters gleamed, the pots and pans hung in neat rows, and the air smelled of fresh paint and promise. Everyone else had gone home. It was just Alexander and Alara, standing in the quiet, finished space. Rain pattered against the large windows, a gentle echo of the night they had first reconnected. Alara ran her hand over the smooth, cool surface of a workstation, a soft smile on her face. "My mom would have loved this," she said, her voice filled with a peaceful sort of melancholy. "She always said a kitchen should be the warmest room in the house." "You made my kitchen the warmest room in my house," Alexander said, moving to stand beside her. He looked around the space at the tangible result of their partnership. It was more real and more satisfying than any corporate merger he had ever orchestrated. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, what he had to do next. He had been carrying the small, velvet box in his pocket for a week, waiting for the right moment. And this was it. Not a grand, public gesture, but a quiet, meaningful one. "Alara," he began, his voice a little unsteady. He turned to face her, taking both of her hands in his. "We started this whole thing with a lie. I pretended to be someone I wasn't because I was afraid. Then I told the truth on a stage in front of hundreds of people because I was trying to fix the mess I'd made. I feel like our whole story has been backwards." He looked into her eyes, seeing his own reflection there. "I want to do it right this time. No lies, no stages. Just us. Here, in the place we built together." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the box. He opened it. Inside was a simple, elegant ring with a single, clear diamond. It wasn't ostentatious. It was classic, timeless, and strong. Like her. "I know what it's like to be alone," he continued, his voice growing thick with emotion. "And you've shown me and my children what it feels like to be a family again. You healed us. You fill every room you're in with warmth and light. I love you. I love the life we have when you're in it." He didn't get down on one knee. It didn't feel right. He just stood before her, an equal, his heart laid bare. "I'm not asking you to be a nanny, or a foundation director, or a society wife. I'm asking you to be my partner. In everything. Let's just keep doing this. Building things, raising our kids, making every room the warmest room. Forever. Will you marry me, Alara?" Tears streamed down her face, but she was smiling. A radiant, beautiful smile that lit up the entire room. She didn't say anything at first. She just threw her arms around his neck, burying her face in his shoulder. He held her tightly, breathing in the familiar, comforting scent of her. Finally, she pulled back, her eyes shining. "Yes," she whispered. "Of course, yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit. And in the quiet of the kitchen they had built, surrounded by the ghosts of their pasts and the promise of their future, they sealed their new beginning with a kiss. It wasn't a fairy tale ending because their story had been far too real for that. It was a choice, a commitment to build a life together, not on the foundation of wealth or status, but on the simple, unshakable bedrock of kindness, forgiveness, and love. And as they held each other, they knew their greatest project was just beginning. A reminder that the best of us is not found in what we have, but in what we are willing to build for others.